Riley Gaines, who is a swimmer at the college level, she competed against Leah Thomas. If people don't already know who that is, that was a trans swimmer who swam against women, biological women. Riley Gaines is going around the nation. She was previously at a Turning Point USA conservative event at San Francisco State University. And while she was talking about how it's unfair to have biological men competing with biological women, she was attacked. And the college, in tandem with the local police department, said, or just the local police, might have just been police who were there on campus, they said that it was peaceful. There were no attacks, and this is all fabrication. Now, we have video footage, we have evidence that there was an attack, and just the fact that you have people who are trans activists can't be peaceful. That's not even a concept in their mind. They have an ideology, they can voice themselves, but they have to resort to violence and infringing on other people's rights because they want to have it their way. Now, Riley Gaines is a good example of someone who actually competed at the highest level and still competes at the highest level, and opportunity was robbed not only from her, but from other women, right? Other women who are competing in that space. And we have Leah Thomas in tandem with a ton of other biological males who are competing in women's sports, not just in swimming, but fighting and all these other sports that are coming out where they're allowing biological males to compete in a separate division that is not akin to their own. Now, the issue with this, it's that when you're a biological male and you've already gone through puberty, you've already gone through adolescence, you've already developed your bone density, you've already developed your height, your wingspan, your muscle fibers. And so even if you're on hormone suppressants, you are still no match, or rather, the women are no match for you, because you are still superior when it comes to physical performance. And men and women are different biologically speaking. This is an obvious, we have tons of research and data if people can already tell just from observation. But even mentally, we're different. And so when you look at chess, for example, the chess players who are ranked at the highest are men. Now, there's no physical attributes involved. It's pure cognitive thinking, it's strategy. And so there are different pros and cons that men have and that women have, right? Women are good at reading faces and reading a room and understanding empathy from a point of view of, let's say, well, where it derived from is looking at an infant's face and having empathy for the infant so you can take care of the infant for whatever tasks that are necessary. Men are good at reading geography, teamwork, strategy. We had to go out, we had to hunt, we had to work with other men. We had to know our way back from the camp and know our way in the jungle so we could go hunt game and bring the game back to the tribe. So we're different, and even if you give all these hormone suppressants, even if you go through even just basic surgery, you are still superior to most women out there when you're competing, let's say, in that physical realm. And so what this does is, now a certain loophole with Title IX is being used. Title IX goes back to the Civil Rights Act. So Title IX is a law using the Civil Rights Act as a basis, and then using the 13th, might be the 13th Amendment as a basis, to ensure that women's and men's sports or just events and areas are separated. So you're separate but equal. The people who are trans activists are using Title IX as a way to say, well, they can identify as a woman and therefore they can compete and you can't discriminate against them. So now what we're doing is we're taking someone's fantasy and making it tie into objective reality, which is, I mean, there's no logic to that. I don't have any expression for that other than there's no logical reasoning to that. See, when we create political policy, when we look at how laws, ethics, rules are placed, we're looking at objective metrics. We're looking at empirical data. Is there some subjectivity to it? Yes. I mean, like, for example, at a certain point, we had to determine when were hominoids Homo sapiens. It's not like all of a sudden, the next day, oh, these are Homo sapiens and the hominoids before are not Homo sapiens. There's a point in time where we say, okay, at this point in time, it's arbitrary, but we're using relative terms to determine, okay, Homo sapiens were bred 200 to 300,000 years ago. So there is a subjective case there, but that's more on the macro. In the micro, we're looking at rules, we're looking at objective metrics to determine what is right, what is wrong, to make things equal and fair in terms of equal opportunity, right? So you can have two women, and one woman may be substantially better genetically, hormonally, just naturally, and outcompete the other woman, but at least it's two XX chromosomes competing with each other versus XY and XX, right? XY is male, right? So you want to have males compete with males, females compete with females. The whole idea of this is if we just push the two genders together, it would be no competition in most sports, because men are the ones who have more ambition, they're more competitive, they have more physical acumen, so they're going to destroy the women when it comes to sports. And sometimes even these sports are like two different sports. So for example, I watch a lot of tennis. You have men's tennis, you have women's tennis. These are almost like two different sports when you're watching them. It's not even comparable, because you can take Serena Williams when she was at her peak and put her next to rank 50 or rank 100 in men's tennis, and she would still lose. It's a totally different game. Now, I personally watch both because they're both entertaining, but it's a totally different game. It's like a totally different sport. Obviously, it's the same sport, but we want women to have their own accolades and compete with themselves. That's why we have a separate division for them, right? We're using objective reality to understand, hey, our species, through evolution, we're a combination of tournament species and pair bonding species. So what that means is, if you have a pair bonding species, you have animals, the male and the female are very similar. They look the same, they're around the same height, same weight. And that's because the male will mate with that partner for life and take care of the baby and stay there long term. A tournament species is when the male is drastically, significantly different in height and weight, maybe even different physical attributes, compared to the females in that species. And the tournament species is just the best, the biggest, the strongest male gets to mate and reproduce with the woman. That's the attraction factor. And he may not stay long term depending on the species. He may just breed, mate, and then, go do his own thing, whatever. We're a combination of that. So what we are is, yes, the males are significantly different. We're different relative to each other. You can tell that just by looking in the mirror when you stand up next to your girlfriend or whatever. Height, weight, generally speaking, men on average are different than women. But we do pair bond, but we're also tournament species, right? So we're not lifelong partners like the pure pair bonding species, and we're not tournament species where we just mate and leave, right? We're a combination of both. So when we do get into relationships, they usually last 4 to 7 years on average. That's about the average time that a couple is married, long enough to where the child or children can grow up and they can kind of do their own thing. And then usually people get a divorce or they separate X, Y, and Z, right? So we're a combination of that. That's the evolutionary tract of how we got to where we are. And when you understand that men and women are different. And we want to make sure that, let me go into the ideology. Why is this ideology being spread? Because we're seeing more and more trans athletes competing with women, and these women are getting destroyed. I saw a fight, I don't think it was UFC, it might have been a different type of MMA organization, but a man who had transitioned into a woman, and by transition, we don't know if it's just hormone suppressants, we don't know if it's surgery, we don't know if they're just identifying, but they still have everything. And he competed with the woman, and the woman obviously got bashed, right? That's not equal, that's not fair, that's not just. It's in that case, it's extremely dangerous because you can actually have someone perish in that situation. Now, if you have two females or two males, it's not like still heavy damage can be done, but when you have a guy versus a girl, I mean, that's a dramatic amount of damage that cannot be sustained to the women, right? So this ideology is stemming from people at the top. They have their ideology, they have the way they see the world. A lot of them are eugenicists. This goes back to England and even America, like over 100 years ago, and that's really to have the best of the species survive and reproduce. And they're looking at certain metrics, which I won't go into, but they want to do artificial selection. So kind of how like we have GMO with our plants, like we artificially breed plants. And so now the same fruits, for example, the same vegetables, the same oranges, bananas, apples that we have now are totally different than the bananas that we had, 5,000 years ago, because we've artificially bred them to make them bigger, juicier, sweeter, all that. Have a ton of carbs, have a ton of glucose, and so they're very different. The GMO plants are very different today than they were 5,000 years ago, and you can even Google this. Or what we've done with wolves. Wolves, I believe, is the quickest succession, the quickest rate that we've artificially changed an evolutionary path of a species. We took wolves, we found the most domestic ones, we bred them, and then we bred them into a bunch of species. And so now we actually have species where they're not even functioning properly, like a bulldog or a pit bull. Their nose is like stuffed into the face, right? So they have a lot of breathing problems. That's because we artificially bred animals, and we didn't care about what was most optimal for the animal. We bred what we wanted to create, right? Now, you have a lot of good breeds that came out of that, like German Shepherds, Huskies, right? These are optimal. They're functioning for certain climates and certain environments, certain work. But of course you have the pit bulls and the bulldogs. That's not cool, right? In terms of now they have a problem with their functionality of their anatomy. So we understand that there are people who want to artificially select instead of naturally select. When you naturally select, you let the species do its thing. Over time, over tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years, the species does change into something. But when you put your hand in it and you play God, these are the people who want to do CRISPR gene editing. They want to be able to control someone's height before they're born, someone's eye color, right? This goes into crazier acts of playing God. And we have an ethical dilemma in that situation where, who gets to choose what kind of attributes or physical attributes or mental attributes they want to give to their child or their potential child. Who should have access to that? Should it be allowed for the whole population? These are ethical quandaries that we have to ask ourselves. And so they want to do that because they want to speed up the process of the species evolving, and they want to tie in technology to it. But they also want to change the course of the way our species is evolving into their ideology. And so they have to ensure that there's a reduction in a certain, let me say this because I want to say it in a nice way. When you have people who are weak-minded, this is the ideology from the elites, when you have people who are weak-minded and you can manipulate them emotionally and you can manipulate them through the media apparatus, you can effectively get them to castrate themselves, ideologically speaking, although they may take that ideology and use a physical representation of it. And so now they really cannot reproduce themselves, but they will ideologically castrate themselves, and thus their weak-mindedness stops their genetic lineage. So that is a way, when you have manipulation coming from the top down, you can now manipulate a certain group of the people, and you can take what was once 1% into like a 10 or maybe even 20%. That would be crazy, but I think right now it's between 5 to 15% of the population identifies as trans or some kind of entity like that. That's a huge range that I'm giving, but before it was like a fraction of 1%. So maybe it's like 7%. I'd have to look at the numbers. But you increase that from a fraction of a percent to 5 to 15% or maybe even 20%, and you're now artificially selecting out a whole group of the population, and that ideological narrative is now served from the people at the top. And the people at the top themselves, they don't even necessarily, they're not like perfect human beings, right? So I like to say the big five, especially for men, are looks, wealth, charisma, mentality, status, right? Those are the big five. A lot of these people at the top, they don't even have all that. Some of them are overweight. They're not mentally all there. So they're using, like humans are flawed, but they're especially flawed. They're flawed, and then they're using improper ideology to enact on the people. I will say they are more intelligent than the average person, right? There's different breeds, different layers of the people who are at the top of these hierarchies. A lot of them are intelligent. They're just malicious in terms of their subjective ideology of how they want to have dominion over the world. So then they will introduce a lot of chaos. And because the average person is just going to bandwagon and be a sheep, they will be part of the narrative, part of the mainstream narrative, and they will go along with this, right? They won't say anything when they have trans athletes competing with women. They won't say anything. And when you do have someone like Riley Gaines, you'll have trans activists who are really just pawns of the overall agenda. These are most likely young, impressionable kids. These trans activists, they will use physical violence and they will infringe on the rights of Riley Gaines, and nothing will happen to these trans activists. And you'll have the police, and you'll even have the institution that is hosting this event say, oh, it's peaceful and no repercussions should be done to this. And so we're living in this backwards world, this backwards society, where over time you will have these pawns will be used. Okay, a lot of these people at the top, they say they care about these pawns, these people, but they don't really care. They just want to use them to do their own, to do the bidding of their ideology. So a lot of these people don't even realize that the people that they're following, the people that they're listening to, these media organizations that they're consuming, these media organizations and these people don't actually care about these people. That's the ironic part. And so they do the bidding of these people, of these organizations. And over time, we end up in the decline of society, which we're seeing now. And this decline of society really only helps people who are already at the top, or people who are leveraging the decline, leveraging the chaos to upholster themselves to be at the top, whether it's in the next 5 years or sometime in the future or whatever. So once you understand what's happening, you see that cultural divide. And this actually will end up backfiring on these people who are at the top. A lot of them are old now, so they won't even see their agenda play out. But this has been an agenda, a few hundred years in the making. You'll have other nations who come in who will forego this entire agenda. Like China will come in, Russia will come in. They'll have their own ideology of conquest. They're not falling for, they're more conservative in nature relative to this progressive movement of trans athletes competing with each other. This is just a micro event of the macro political situation. And these other countries will come in and they'll subvert our culture, subvert our political systems, our fiscal systems. And this whole ideology of trans and artificially manipulating people, this will all be forgone, and America will be something else, right? So how we see America right now could be very different in the next 500 years, just as empires come and go. Empires rise, they fall, they have different ideologies, different belief systems, different religions, different currencies. It all comes and goes. And within these systems, you'll have people who are intelligent, they rise to power, but they all have different ideologies. The ideology that should be praised is the ideology that promotes individuals, right? So in this case, if Riley Gaines was assaulted, these people need to be held responsible for that. They need to go to jail. They need to, of course, have their due process, go to trial. But we need to make sure that a country that protects life, liberty, and property is what matters. And you have to let things play out naturally. You have to, you can introduce technology, and if people want to use and adapt it, like, this gets very deep, because you will have, let's say, social media systems, social media platforms. They are so focused on the engineering of these platforms to addict you, not for the good of humanity, but to promote that product, that service, because you are what they're making money off of through information, ads, X, Y, and Z. They will make sure this shade of red is what attracts you the most on this landing page. This type of outrage on your newsfeed for this amount of minutes, or these topics, this is what gets you to stay on for 34 more minutes. Like, this is how engineered they are. And so there's an unethical component to that, although the other side of that is they're being capitalist because they want their market share for that company to rise, of course. But we have to understand how we're being manipulated, how we're being played to all these different systems that are occurring, right? It's not like there's one main narrative. There's like 10, 12 different narratives, and they're all being hit at us at the same time by different institutions, different people, different layers of people. And so the only way to combat this is to speak out and to hold institutions, hold government entities, hold people accountable. That doesn't mean you do what these trans activists did, because that's not cool to infringe on someone's rights, especially using violence. But to use your voice, to speak out, to say no to people, and to hold your ground, right? Riley Gaines is a prime example of going around to different places and speaking about this atrocity because she was personally involved in this. And a lot of people don't necessarily empathize with this until it personally affects them, until you're in a situation where you have a daughter, and of course you really care about your daughter because 50% of your DNA is in your daughter, and she's now competing, maybe she's in golf, and then you have a guy who comes in and is competing with her, and it's not like you're betting on her being the next Tiger Woods or the female Tiger Woods, but you want her to enjoy her high school or college career of she has a sport, she's passionate about it, that's really cool. Now you have a guy coming in, and it's not necessarily that you dislike the guy or you want to discriminate against the guy. It's more so that these sports, these divisions need to be separated so there's equal opportunity for your daughter. Now that's a personal situation that would have to affect you. And so I would say, do not wait until it personally affects you, because by then it may be too late. Usually by the time crisis hits and you personally feel it, like we're seeing with a bunch of different things, inflation, it's usually too late. There is a small percentage, a small sliver of hope, a small sliver of, rather, if we're being objective, opportunity that you could leverage to change the situation, to ameliorate the situation. And this might be one of those situations where you can actually empathize through visualization, through meditation, and then you can see how this could have such calamity in the future. And you want to make sure that there's recourse right now, not 5 years from now, when you can't really do anything or you have less power than you have right now. I understand everyone's in a very tough situation. The vast majority of Americans are in a tough situation. Vast majority of Americans don't have enough money for a $500 emergency. You live paycheck to paycheck. You're kind of stuck in a job that you don't really like. But you can do things over time, like limiting your finance or having a budget for your finances, stop spending money on extravagant things, cut your leisure time, put more time into work, put more time into a side hustle. There are a lot of things you can do. It may seem like a 5% difference here, but add up those 5%, right? 5% saving on your budget, 5% you're putting time, energy, and effort into a side hustle. Like over time, that's 25% difference in your life. You compound that daily. Now you have something significant, and you can use that power to do some kind of, you don't have to be a public servant, but you can do some type of service to the public in exchange of, yeah, there's rewards for you, right? Like if you start a business, you can profit from that business, but your business can be ideologically opposed to the negative and improper ideologies that are occurring right now in society. And that's where we win. We win in those margins. And those margins compound over time, and that's how you actually change an entire society.